appreciative that you would take the time to come and listen to this book review. And I do have a goal today, and the goal is that when you leave after I'm done, I want you to be much smarter than when you walk into the door. But this is a book review, and any time that I give a speech and I get in front of the audience, I always start off the same way, and that is that before I get into my comments, I want to do a disclaimer. You know, as Beth said, I spent the majority of my time as a naval officer, in the uniform of a naval officer. I have a graduate degree from the Naval War College. For 4 years, I was a professor at the graduate level teaching national security strategy and policy at the National War College in D.C. But as I move through my comments today, I am not representing the Navy. I am not representing the National War College. I'm not representing the Department of Defense or the Naval War College. Anything that I say today is just my thoughts based on my experience and what I have read. Nothing more than that. As I move through my thoughts today, I'm going to talk about the left and the right. When I talk about the left, I'm talking specifically about today's Democratic Party. Even though I'm going to make comments about the Democratic Party, I do not represent the Democratic Party. Okay, you know that I ran for Congress here in the Congressional 4th District. I'm going to talk about the right today. When I talk about the right, I'm talking about today's Republican Party. Okay, when I talk about today's Republican Party, I am not representing the Republican Party. I'm not representing the Congressional 4th District, nor am I representing the Duval County GOP. So anything that I say is just my opinion and is not to be associated with any other entity. Okay, so today we're going to talk about rules for radicals. And this is the book right here. As you see, it's rather small. You know, it's not good for a naval aviator because it doesn't have any pictures in it. But, and the words, even though it's a little less than 200 pages, the words are actually very large in here. So it's an easy read. I would encourage you to buy it. You can get it on Amazon and read it for yourself. But even though it's a small book, it has had huge implications for what we see going on in today's environment. Now, I'd heard Olinsky and I had heard Rules for Radicals occasionally, but I didn't really know anything about it. It wasn't until 2009. Susan and I lived in Washington, D.C. We lived in Fairfax Station. My kids went to school there in Fairfax County. And I was just beginning to educate myself about this book and who Olinsky was and what his thoughts, the impact that it had on our political discourse. And I was doing that in my 40s. And then I go to a teacher conference, there at the high school where my kids went, and I walk in the front door, and there's a big poster in the high school that says, "Come and learn about Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals." And I'm thinking, well, gosh, here I am in my 40s learning about it, and yet someone's at the high school teaching it to my kids if they want to come and see this lecture. And if you kind of get a feel for what's going on our nation's campuses, this book is having great impact on the generation that's coming forward because they're being taught the tactics that are in this book. So that is kind of the premise of the book, and if you look at, you don't have to watch much television, you don't have to watch much C-SPAN, but I'm sure you've noticed in the last, especially the last 15 years, how caustic our political discourse has become. It's as if we can't even talk about the issues because all the vast majority of people seem to do in Washington, D.C. is try to destroy whoever's there trying to do good. I mean, every morning, you know, I'm a news junkie, so every morning I get on my phone and I turn on the news app, and it's just constant bad-mouthing, undercutting, stating how people in the government, they're idiots, we need to get rid of them, and constant name-calling that never seems to end, and it causes a very caustic, almost evil environment where you can't seem to get anything done for the country, anything good for the country. Now notice that I said the word evil there. Okay, that's a very strong statement. But let me remind you, I don't represent any entity but myself. Even though We Can Be Heroes Foundation has asked me to come to talk today, I do not represent the We Can Be Heroes Foundation. But I'm using that word on purpose, and you'll see why that I say that what we're seeing is really a manifestation of evil as I move through my comments. Okay, so the book is Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Now, you know from my bio that I taught national security strategy and policy. So I want to talk a little bit about strategy first. anyone who has ever studied strategy are going to study two books. The first book is the kind of the Asia way of thinking about strategy. And this is Sun Tzu, Art of War. Okay? It's not a very thick book, a little bit bigger than Olinsky's book, but it's kind of, or it is, the way how Asians think about strategy. So this was written by Sun Tzu, who was Chinese. And the axiom that you're going to take away from when you study his tactics is he says, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you have no fear of the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will suffer a defeat. And if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So what he's saying there is that if you know yourself, you can be successful 50% of the time. And if you know your enemy, you can win 50% of the time. And if you don't know yourself or your enemy, you're going to lose every time. And the issues that I see with people from the right is they don't really understand where the left is coming from, and it's because we don't understand this book. Because as Christians, we have a Bible, right? And I'm telling you, this book that I'm talking about is the Bible of the left. So that's what Sun Tzu says. Okay, there's a second person that, when we talk about strategy, that every person who's ever studied strategy has read. And his name is Karl von Clausewitz. Now, this is the European way of thinking, okay? Now, you'll notice that there's a big difference between Clausewitz and Sun Tzu. The only thing they have in common is there's no pictures in either book. But this is very thick and the words are very, very small. And this book is good for three things. It's good for teaching you strategy, it's good for curing insomnia, and it makes a really good doorstop. That's what that book is good for right there, okay? So those are the two strategic books that everyone's going to read if you're studying strategy. Now, there's an axiom that comes out of that big book I just showed you. So the 19th century strategist Clausewitz said that war is politics by other means. Okay, war is politics by other means. What he meant by that is that if you look at the continuum of history from the very beginning until today, what you have is war, peace, war, peace, war, peace. And that continues. And the purpose of war is that you're looking for a better form of peace. So, and then you have peace for a while and you still have conflict. How do you solve those conflicts? Well, you solve those conflicts through diplomatic relations, right? But there are things that you would do in war that you would never do in diplomatic relations. I think that's would make common sense, right? So we try to do diplomatic relations. We get to a point where we can't solve the issue diplomatically, then we go to war. And we stay at war for a while until we get tired of killing each other, and then we're like, hey, let's have a better form of peace. Let's go back to less war and more peace, and then you move in that direction. So what Clausewitz said is that in this continuum is that war is just politics by other means. But he also meant that there were things that you would do in politics that you don't, or there's things you do in war that you don't do in politics. And also, if you look at war, and you can pick any war from World War I to World War II, all the way back into the Spartan Wars, if you look at those wars as they progress, there are things that people will accept and do at the end of the war that they would never even consider at the beginning of the war. And the reason for that is because as the war progresses, you get sick of it. The average person gets sick of it, and they just want the war to end. And so what people get to is, what do we have to do? How much cruelty do we have to inflict on the other side so that they'll quit? Because we want to bring our loved ones home. We want to bring them home alive. We want this war to be over. So if you look at any war, things that you find that the warriors are doing on the battlefield and what even the average civilian will accept at the end of the war is totally different from what they will accept at the beginning of the war. For example, 1941, we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. Okay? Pearl Harbor was a military installation. The Japanese who attacked Pearl Harbor, these were the Japanese military. So you got Japanese military against a military installation. Now there were civilians, I agree, that were killed at Pearl Harbor, but in that instance it was military upon military. If at that time, if on the 8th of December, if someone had said, hey, the way we're going to end this war is we're going to incinerate children, women, and old men, would we have accepted that? Probably not. But that's exactly what we did in 1945, because 4 years later, we just want the war to be over. So we dropped two nuclear weapons. We dropped it on civilian targets, and that's exactly what we did. We incinerated little kids, women, and old people, and the public accepted that because at that point they were thinking, just want to get the war over. And the thought I want to put in your head is that at that point, the ends justify the means. Because the end is, let's just get the war over, and if we have to do really ugly things, we're willing to accept that because we want to get back to peace. Okay, so Clausewitz said war is politics by other means. The 20th century strategist Alinsky says politics is war by other means. He takes what Clausewitz says and he turns it on its head. And what Olinsky said by politics is war by other means is that where Clausewitz said there's things that you do in war that you would never do in politics, Olinsky says, you know what, the things that you do in war, it's okay to do it in politics. And if you have to destroy someone, even if that person is very good, so what? You do it because you want to win your political campaign or whatever campaign that you're trying to achieve. So Clausewitz was all about kind of toning things down, and Alinsky was all about ramping things up. Okay, this is Mr. Alinsky. This is him in Chicago. He actually was quite a family man. He was married 3 different times. His first wife died in the late 40s, accidental drowning, and his second wife he's married to for quite some time, but she ended up having mental issues, and he had to put her in a hospital, and then he elected to divorce her, even though he took care of her to the very end. And then his last wife, he married a year prior to him dying in 1972. He had 2 kids, one of them a son named David, and I'm going to pull up a quote from his son a little later in the presentation. Okay, so he was born in 1909. He was Russian. His parents were Russian Jewish immigrants. Okay, his parents were good Jews. They had a son named Saul. You know, that's a very biblical name. And they wanted Saul to be a rabbi. So his parents wanted him to be a rabbi, but he decided at a young age that he wanted to be a radical instead. And the research that I have done, apparently it was right around the age of 12. Now, I'm not sure how at the age of 12 you decide that you want to be a radical and that's what you do for the rest of your life, but that's what he decided, and he was actually very good at it. He attended the University of Chicago, where he got a graduate degree in criminology. Okay, he, in doing his studies on criminology, became very good friends with the Chicago Mafia, the Mafia of the 30s. They knew him. He used to tell the mafiosos, hey, you're the professor and I'm the student. I'm just going to learn from you. And they accepted him, brought him in. And a lot of the tactics that we're going to talk about in his book, he actually learned from the mob. He published 2 books. His first book was in 1946. It's called Reveille for Radicals. Okay, the biggest thing we want to learn from that particular book is he really lays out his socialist viewpoints. Okay, he was not a fan of capitalism. Okay, notice that he was born in 1909. The very first area that he organized was the part of Chicago where Upton Sinclair wrote the book The Jungle. And it's kind of ironic because Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle in 1909, the same year that Alinsky was born. Now, Alinsky was a paradoxical figure because even though he was a leftist, he was a labor organizer, but he hung out with clergymen, mafia leaders, and corporate tycoons. He was Jewish by birth, but atheist by conviction. Didn't believe in heaven or hell, didn't believe in God or Satan. But he worked closely with the Catholic bishops and the Protestant pastors in his area. He hated much about America and sought through a ballot box revolution to replace the country that he lived in with a different kind of country. Okay, one that was not compatible with the vision of the founders. Okay, he thought that the founders were flawed. He thought that what they set up was not good enough and that there was a way to change it. But he did not care for violent revolution. He looked at what the Bolsheviks had done in Russia. He was listening to the radicals, the anti-war protesters of the 60s, and he said that he did not agree that that's how you should take over the country, that what you really do is you organize, you radicalize people, you organize them, you bust them in to vote, more than once if you need to, I guess, and then you gradually turn the country into a socialist, communist utopia that you want it to be, but you do it through the ballot box and not through the end of the gun. Now put this slide up here because this is quotes and references. And the purpose of this slide is I don't want you to think that Alinsky is just some kind of left-wing nutcase that's just throwing out statements that don't have any meaning or any research associated with it. On the contrary, Olinsky was a hardcore academic. He was a voracious reader. And I already pointed out that the book is very small. As it says on the front, it's just a primer for radicals. It really is more of a primer than it is a book because it's so small. And yet, he has these quotes and more, and when he's making these quotes, he's not mocking these people. He's actually taking various parts of what he's reading and synthesizing it into a book that truly has some substance when he's trying to talk to people about how to organize and take over our political the political landscape. Now, the first person up there is Machiavelli. Machiavelli was an Italian who lived in the 1500s, and he wrote a book called The Prince. And the purpose of that book was to tell the people in power, and Alinsky called those people the haves. These were the people that had the wealth and the money, and at that time it would have been kings and queens. Hence the name of the book, The Prince. And what Machiavelli said is that if you read my book, and it was considered the first philosophical political treaty, the very first philosophical political treaty. And what it did was told those that were in power, this is how you remain in power. And the takeaway from that book is that he told these people in the 16th century Italy, in the 1500s, that if you have to do something that's immoral to stay in power, that makes it moral. Let me say that to you again. Machiavelli told the people that were in power in Italy in the 1500s that if you have to do something immoral to stay in power, that makes that act moral. And Alinsky took that thought and put it into Rules for Radicals. Now, when he starts his book, he says that Machiavelli wrote The Prince for the haves. These are the people who have all the power and the money. And the reason that he wrote Rules for Radicals is that he was going to show the have-nots. These are the people that don't have any money and don't have any power. These are the people that are we consider the poor, lower-class citizens, the poor. They don't have any power. And so he said, I'm writing Rules for Radicals to show the have-nots how to get power and what to do with it. So with him saying that, you think, well, then when you read the book, that there would be other references to Machiavelli. And actually, there's not. He makes that opening quote about Machiavelli, and he never comes back to it. But the second person is Milton. And Milton wrote a story called Paradise Lost. And the character that he bases his strategy on in Paradise Lost is Satan. Because in Paradise Lost, Satan is trying to organize various groups to support Satan and what he's trying to achieve. And so even though he never really talks that much about Milton and really kind of hangs his hat on Machiavelli as far as the basis for his book, when you read the book, Machiavelli is just one little comment, but the themes of Paradise Lost, specifically the Satan character, is what shines out through the book itself. So he talks about Socrates, Thomas Paine, a lot about Lincoln, Samuel Adams, Pascal, General MacArthur, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, Adam Smith, which are our founding fathers, Napoleon Bonaparte, the Christ, Apostle Paul, Saul of Tarsus, and Moses. Now, can you really see the dichotomy here? Here is someone who is Jewish. So Jewish normally don't read the New Testament. They read the Old Testament. And he's an atheist. So if he's an atheist, he's not going to be reading the Bible, right? He's not going to be talking about theology, especially if you look at the left when they do talk about Christianity. For the most part, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand Christianity because they don't take the time to understand it, and they think it's bigoted and hateful and all the other things that they say. But here you have someone who's Jewish, he's reading the New Testament, and on top of that, he's atheist, and he's read the entire Bible. When he's talking about Moses, he's in the book of Deuteronomy. When he's talking about Christ, he's in the book of Luke. And when he's talking about Paul, he's in 1 Corinthians. And again, he's not mocking the Bible. He's actually giving credit where credit's due, and he's pulling out strategic thoughts out of the Bible and then placing it into his book. So again, he's very much an academic, and he takes everything around him, and he doesn't mock anything because he feels like that in everything that he reads, there's at least one point that he can pull out and put in his book, Rules for Radicals. Martin Luther, who started the Reformation. Niels Bohr, who is a physicist. George Bernard Shaw, Gandhi, the Declaration of Independence. Even Alice in Wonderland, he has quotes in there, again, talking about strategy. Thoreau, Edmund Burke, Disraeli, and of course his favorites, Lenin, Mao, Castro, and Stalin, who are all communists, Che Guevara also, and then the nihilist philosopher Nietzsche. And that's not all of them. Again, a very small book, but a lot of references as he's stepping through his thoughts on strategy and how to transform the country. So every book has to have a thesis, right? And he's right off the bat. He tells you what the thesis is of his book. My aim here is to suggest how to organize for power, how to get it and how to use it. If Olinsky was alive today and Beth was to call him and say, hey, we have this conservative group in Jacksonville, would you come and speak to us? He would say, sure, because we already know he hung out with Protestant pastors, he hung out with Catholic bishops. He would talk to anyone as long as you paid him. And if you wanted him to teach you how to organize, he would stand right here where I'm standing and he would tell you everything that I'm getting ready to tell you, but he would actually follow up with you so that you could actually do it. But if he stood here, how he started every one of his speeches is he would look at you and he would say, what do you want? And you might say, well, you know, we want more jobs in Jacksonville, or we want cleaner air, or we want cleaner water, or we want to change City Hall. And he would let you make your statements for a while, and then he would stop and he would yell at you and he would say, no, what you want is power. Because once you get power, then you can do all the other things that you say that you want to do. And then he would say, I'm going to show you how to get power, and then we're going to use it. And once you get the power, then you can do whatever, all these other things that you want to do. Because he felt like that when people say, I want jobs for the minority jobs, or I want cleaner water, he just thought that was foolish, that you were never going to get there because you're not going to get there without power. And he's going to show the have-nots how to get power. He also said we must first see the world as it is and not as we would like it to be. Now, I find this comment interesting because when I taught strategy at the National War College, we used to tell the students this all the time. If you're going to lay out strategy, a national and international strategy, you got to see the world as it actually is and not some pie in the sky the way that you'd like it to be. So when he would get around, be educating the people that were in front of him, if they kind of gave this pie-in-the-sky utopia, he would cut them off and say, look, before you can even get to step one, before I can even get moving to show you how to get power, you're going to have to look at the world as it actually is and not as you would like it to be. So if you live in government housing and it's full of cockroaches and rats, then you need to admit to yourself, I live around a bunch of cockroaches and rats, because if you don't even realize that, I'm not going to work with you. So you must see the world as it is and not as you would like it to be. Now, you said there was three groups. The haves, Machiavelli, the prince, the haves. These are the people that already have power. These are the Trumps, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, Bill Gates, who owns Microsoft. Those are the haves. A lot of money, a lot of power, but not a lot of them. Okay, then you have the have-nots. These are what we would consider the downtrodden, the poor. They don't have any money, they don't have any influence, but there's a lot of them. And then the third group is the have a little, want mores. Okay? The have a little, want mores, that's the middle class. That would be us. Okay? And what he said is that in the middle class, and the middle class, they could be Mormons, they could be Presbyterians, they could be Baptists, but they could be atheists. But what all middle class people have in common is they just want to take care of their family. They want to have a job. They want to go hunting on Saturday, they want to go to church on Sunday, they want to have a job on Monday. They just want to take care of their families. Maybe buy a new car once every 10 years, go on a vacation every now and again. Okay? That is what the middle class wants. They're not looking to change the world. They may be just looking to change their community. And so Olinsky looked at the middle class and said, that is where the power lies. Now what's fascinating is he looked at the middle class and said, hey, that's where the power lies. And he said the reason that the middle class is so powerful is because they're basically good. Because they're basically just wanting to take care of their families and their communities. And he said they have a lot of power because they're basically good, and if I could radicalize them and corrupt them and destroy them, then there would just be the haves and the have-nots, but I would be the one that's in control. Now that's really kind of ironic also when you think about Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville was a French aristocrat who came to America in the early 1800s because Europe was looking at America And they were amazed at how quickly America was growing in wealth and power. And by the 1840s, America had only been around for roughly about 70 to 80 years. And the Europeans were in awe of how fast the power base was growing in America. And so de Tocqueville came to America, and he's just hanging out with the middle class, trying to figure out what is it about them that's causing them to grow so quickly. And he finally decided that the reason that America is doing so well is because basically America is good. And he said that. He said America is strong because America is basically good. And then he said when America ceases to be good, America will cease to be strong. And you fast forward to Olinsky, he looks at the middle class, the American middle class, and says, they're very strong because they're good. I need to destroy them. Because once I destroy the good, then I'll be in charge, and we can make America any way that we want to. Okay, so when you have a book, you dedicate it to someone, right? You have a dedication page. You dedicate it to your wife or your husband or your pastor or some coach that really helped you. Well, he has a dedication to his book. So it's at the very front. He says, lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical. From all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which? The very first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did so effectively, and at least he won his own kingdom, Lucifer. So when I had my opening comments and I said, hey, if you feel like when you're looking at political discourse today that it just seems evil, you may not agree with everything that I'm telling you today, but I would hope as a collective group that when we look at the term Lucifer, that on a good to bad scale, I would hope that at least we could all agree that would be tending toward the bad scale. Okay? And that is who he dedicates his book to. Now, someone that you know that is a hardcore Alinskyite is Barack Obama. I'm going to talk about him a little later also and about how he moved in that direction. But when he was running against Romney, there was a debate where they told both Romney and Obama, we're going to give you some time to ask the other candidate one question. And if I could have advised Romney on anything, I would have told Romney, why don't you look at Obama and say, hey, I know that you spent most of your time in Chicago. You are a great community organizer. You are a huge fan of Alinsky. And, of course, Obama would have loved that because Obama was very narcissistic and he would love the compliments. But I thought Romney should say, hey, we know that you are a big fan of Alinsky and you're a great organizer. I want you to look in the camera and tell American people why you support a book that was dedicated to Satan. And just be quiet and see what he would say. Because then he would have to defend to the American people, yeah, I'm an Alinskyite. Oh, by the way, it was dedicated to Satan, and now I want to be your president. So explain yourself. That would have been advice if I could give any to Romney on this issue of Obama being an Alinskyite and the fact that the book is dedicated to Lucifer. So Satan's model is not the prince, and Satan's model is, or Alinsky's model is not Machiavelli. Satan's model is actually Alinsky's model is actually Satan's model. 4 steps: polarization, demonization, organization, and then deception. You lie as much as you need to accomplish whatever you need to accomplish. Okay? Polarization, demonization, organization, and deception. Now do you know why they want to be community organizers? Of means and ends. You do whatever it takes to win. You lie when it works, you tell the truth when it works. And if you have to destroy a good and honorable person to get power, then you do it. Because remember, Olinsky said that politics is war. It's war by other means. And you don't have to be nice because now we're going to really weaponize politics. Now, what about destroying good and honorable person? The individual that comes to mind is General Flynn. Now, here was a guy who did everything he could for the country. I mean, the guy was a 2-star general. He spoke truth to power. Okay? He served honorably. How did his country treat him? Destroyed him. Bankrupted him. He had to sell his house. You don't even hear anything out of him anymore because I think he's trying to put his life back together. He got in the way. Now, the ironic thing about that is he's a registered Democrat. He's a registered Democrat, and yet the Democrats destroyed him. Only because he got in their way, and the means, the ends always justify the means. And if you have to destroy a 2-star general, so what? He's in the way, and he should learn not to be there. Okay. Author Henry James said that life, in fact, is a battle. Evil is insolent and strong. Goodness very apt to be weak. Wickedness carries the day. Imbeciles tend to be in great places, and people of sense in small. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Okay, so evil tends to be very strong. Goodness tends to be weak. Wickedness tends to carry the day. All you got to do is read any newspaper, and you see a lot of that. And certainly, I think we'll agree that we have quite a lot of imbeciles that seem to be in very great places making decisions about us, and people of sense tend to have just small places. Okay. So in 1969, a Wellesley undergrad submitted a 92-page senior thesis on Olinsky's theories. Okay, he was interviewed for the paper. The student compared Olinsky to Walt Whitman and Martin Luther King. And the title of the paper, There's Only the Fight, an Analysis of the Olinsky Model, which I'm pretty impressed that it was 92 pages long considering how little this book was. And it's little less than 200, but like I said, the pages are small and the words are big. So apparently she had a lot of thoughts about the Olinsky model, and you probably know who I'm talking about. It's a pretty young Hillary Clinton, isn't it? Yeah, so it was Hillary Clinton. So she knew Olinsky personally. And I've often thought that if you really wanted to see her to have a meltdown, Obama was too young to know Olinsky personally, because Obama's my age. So when Olinsky died in '72, Obama would have only been 9 years old. But she was old enough to know him personally. And I often thought that if you wanted to see her have a meltdown, it would have been to put Obama and Hillary on the same stage and then say, hey, I know both of you are Olinskyites, and you're both very good at rules for radicals, and Hillary, you actually knew Olinsky personally. I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to tell us why Obama's better at Olinsky's tactics than you are. And just watch her have this huge meltdown and see what would happen. I'm not sure she could make it off the stage. So Hillary was a Goldwater girl in the early 60s, actually a conservative. And then she became radicalized and was a committed leftist by 1965. Okay, she felt that the tactics of the 60s leftists were juvenile. And Alinsky talks a lot about that in his book, because the book came out in the 70s, so he dealt with the radicals that were on the march in the 60s. These were the Vietnam anti-war protesters, and some of you in here are older than me. You're a lot more familiar with that than I am, because you remember that. But he did not care for those radicals. As Reagan described them, he said, I don't care for the 60s radicals because they look like Tarzan, they walk like Jane, and they smell like Cheetah. And Alinsky didn't care for them either. And he didn't care for them because they were always screaming epitaphs. They were screaming at the police. They called them pigs because they didn't like the police. Well, some things never changed because that's just Black Lives Matter. And the left at that time would scream at men who were coming back from the Vietnam War. Anytime they saw anyone wearing a uniform, they called them fascists. Do you ever hear that term thrown around by the left today? All the time. You know, you're a fascist, you're a homophobe, you're a xenophobe, you're a racist. That's the one that the left throws around all the time. And Alinsky didn't care for that. He said it's juvenile, it's ridiculous, and oh, by the way, if you say that to the wrong person that might be sympathetic to you, you've already cut them off. They're not going to support someone who is constantly calling them a racist. And he said, it's very immature anyway, you need to quit doing it, and I don't want to really be involved with you. So he did not really care for the radicals of the 60s for that reason. Hillary was the same way. These were the tactics of people outside the tent peering in. Hillary wanted to be inside the tent peering out. She wanted to be on the inside, not on the outside screaming like the anti-war protesters were at that time. In 1968, the Democratic Convention was held in Chicago. There were 10,000 anti-war protesters at that convention. There were 20,000 police and military at that convention. So you got 30,000 just between the police, military, and the protesters. And of course, there was a big riot that erupted. But because of what the middle class was seeing on television, they really moved away from the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party won in '68, and then they won again in 1972. And Olinsky credited that to the fact that the left, the radicalized left, all they did was run around screaming racist things at people, or name calling people, and it just turned them off, and that's why he didn't like it. Okay, so Hillary had met Alinsky while in high school, but renewed her association with him in college. inviting him to come and speak at Wellesley. So when Hillary graduated, Alinsky actually offered her a job, but she declined to go to law school instead. So here's Barack Obama. So there's two Olinskyites, and we almost had them back to back. If you read any of Dinesh D'Souza's book, he talks about this. And I had actually made this statement also. In one of his books, he says, if we had had 8 years of Obama and then 8 years of Hillary, he didn't feel like we could ever turn our country around, because we would have had 16 years of the Olinsky tactics transforming, as he said, we're 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the nation. That's what he was talking about, a revolution at the ballot box to move it away from freedom and toward a communist utopia. Now, the first time that I saw this image, I saw it on the news, and the newscasters was all abuzz about how Obama was a constitutional authority, and that here he is teaching the Constitution. And yet, if you pull that up, upper left-hand corner, it's power analysis, and then relationships built on self-interest. That's straight out of Saul Alinsky's book. He's teaching community organizing there. He's not teaching the Constitution. He had great disdain for the Constitution. So not the Constitution, community organizing. Okay? So how well known are these tactics? Well, I'm trying to teach you today to look out for them, but those on the left who knew these tactics were seeing them right away. I told you that Alinsky had a son. His name was David. So David Alinsky was writing in the Boston Globe, and he marveled at how many of his father's methods were evident at the 2008 Democratic National Convention. It was clear, he wrote, that Obama had learned his lessons well. So you remember what the theme was for Obama's campaign? Hope and change. Right? You probably thought that he came up with that. This is page 103 from the book. Organizer's job is to inseminate an invitation for himself, to agitate, to introduce ideas, to get people pregnant with hope and a desire for change, and identify you as a person most qualified for that purpose. So that's where he got his hope and change theme for his campaign. Page 103 out of the book. Now, I'll put this slide in here for a reason, because Olinsky was very confident in his ability to organize. And like I said, he didn't care for capitalists or capitalism, even though he did work with CEOs and owners of large businesses. But I took this out of the book because he said, I'm so good I could persuade a millionaire on a Friday to subsidize a revolution on Saturday, out of which he would make a huge profit on Sunday, even though he was certain to be executed on Monday. And the reason that I put that up there is because remember when Obama was doing Obamacare? Who did he bring into the room to get them on board? It was the CEOs of the healthcare companies and the medical insurance companies. And he brought them all in and said, hey, look at what I'm going to do. I'm going to force the American people to buy your product. If they don't buy the product, it'll be illegal. They're going to have all this pressure to buy your product. You're going to make huge sums of money. Oh, by the way, we're going to have this government option over here so we can have more competition. Problem is, you can't compete with the government. They got all the money and all the power. But because the CEOs saw how much money they were going to make in a short period of time, they signed on to it. I'm sure some of them figured it out, but they would have already made their millions and have been out of there. But what was going to happen is that once Obamacare came through and you're trying to compete with the government, one by one, your insurance companies were going to fall away, your medical companies were going to fall away, and eventually you just have only one option, and that would have been the government option, and you'll get whatever they offer you, and they're going to charge you a lot for it. And if you don't like it, well, you can die, because you're going to have no options at that point. So that's why I put that in there, because Obama was a very good Olinskyite, and he knew what he was doing. And he brought all those people in and got them on board and moved forward. And if you remember what happened when Obamacare passed, almost immediately, what happened to the insurance companies and the healthcare companies? They started to consolidate. They're like, we can't make it on our own. We have to consolidate and get bigger and bigger and bigger because it's so hard to compete with the government option. But that was in the plan, to gradually cut these people out so that finally the last insurance company and the last commercial healthcare company would say, we give up, you win, it's going to be the government, nothing else. And then we would have got low quality healthcare for high prices, just like all the other social countries. Okay, you had an entire chapter on communication. And the opening line to this chapter is, he said, if you're not a good communicator, forget it. This is not going to work for you, no matter how many times you read my book. He said communication is the key. I bring that up because remember the president that we said was a great communicator? That was Reagan. He didn't need a teleprompter. But remember Obama? He couldn't speak without a teleprompter. You pull up any of his YouTube where he's doing interviews, he's bumbling and stumbling through the whole thing. He can't make a coherent sentence unless he's reading it off a teleprompter. So he wasn't a very good communicator, but he was certainly a good reader. And that's why his handlers kept him on the teleprompter at all times, because he knew that in order for Olinsky tactics to work, he had to be a good communicator. He wasn't, but like I said, he was a very good reader. Another thing that Olinsky talks about all throughout his book is that laughter helps. And I find that really ironic, because when I look at the left today, I don't really see any laughter. To me, they just seem like miserable, hateful people, and the only time they even put a smile on their face is when they're making somebody else miserable and unhappy. You know, I think about the rally that they had 3 days after the inauguration. There was all these women wearing these ridiculous hats on their heads, and when you watch them on television, all they did was make fools out of themselves and scream obscenities and just act angry. So apparently that part of where Olinsky said, hey, why don't you laugh and try to enjoy life a little bit, apparently they've thrown those sentences out of the book, because I don't see any laughter from them at all. Okay, to get into the tactics, the rules, there's 13 of them. And so he said that you have to see things as they truly are, and you have to use what's around you. And he said, first, use your eyes. If you have organized a vast, mass-based people's organization, you can parade it visibly for the enemy and openly show your power. Second, if you have ears. If your organization is small in numbers, then do what Gideon did. Conceal the numbers in the dark, but raise a din and clamor that will make the listener believe that your organization numbers many more than it actually does. And lastly, he said, the nose. If your organization is too tiny, even for noise, then just stink the place up. Right? Because he said that if you have all the money and all the power, you can rule the world. If you don't have all the money, if you have all the money and all the people, you can rule the world, because then you'll have all the power. If you have all the money and all the people, you can rule the world. If you don't have all the money, then you better have all the people. And if you don't have all the people, you better have all the money if you're going to make any change. And between the two, if you have to make a choice, it's better to have all the people, because it's easier to get people to show up than if you have to use money to pay them to get there. But he also said if you don't have either one, if you don't have the money, you don't have the people, then just stink the place up. I.e., whatever organization you're going to go against, just trying to ruin what they're trying to do. Just trying to go out there and say ugly things, or mess with their property, or whatever it takes for you just to try to ruin the good things that they're trying to do. Okay, there's 13 rules. I'm going to start at the top, or I'm going to start at the bottom and go to the top. And the reason is because this very first one, which is actually the last one, Rule 13, is the one that is most obvious to us when we watch television or read the news. Okay, rule number 13, you pick your target. You freeze it, you personalize it, and you polarize it. Remember I said this is actually Satan's model, right? Polarization, demonization, organization, and then deception. You lie. So you cut off the support network and isolate the target for sympathy. You go after people, not institutions, because people hurt faster than institutions. It's cruel but effective. Direct, personalized criticism and ridicule works. Take just right here in Jacksonville. If you say, you know what, I'm really angry with what I see around me. I'm going to go fight City Hall. Well, you can't fight City Hall, because City Hall is just a building. And buildings don't have feelings. But you can go after the city council, you can go after the members on the city council, you can go after the mayor, and you would make it as personal as possible. You would attack him personally and harass him till either you got your way or he quit. Okay? Perfect example of this. Pick your target, freeze it. What does freeze it mean? Okay? What about the Kavanaugh hearings? Okay, Trump picks Kavanaugh to be on the Supreme Court. The left will have none of that. They do not want Kavanaugh to be there. So as soon as Trump picks Kavanaugh, the left begins to follow him, right? So what's Kavanaugh doing? Well, he's a womanizer. He's cheating on his wife. He's getting drunk every night after he gets off the court. Is that what he's doing? No. They start following the guy. The guy, even the day that Trump nominated him, he's out feeding the poor, and he did that on a regular basis. He's only been married once. He's got a beautiful wife and 2 young daughters. He's involved at his parish. He's feeding the poor downtown. He's helping everyone around him that he can. He is just a kind, nice man. Okay? How are you going to destroy someone like that? You can't. You got to freeze it. You got to go back to when he was in high school and college. When you remember, when he was doing these drunken parties and raping everybody, that's what he means by freeze it. You have to destroy the guy, and so if he's a really, really good guy like Kavanaugh was, you got to pick some point in his life and convince everybody that you don't want that individual because of these horrible things that he did when he was in high school or college. It doesn't matter if he actually did them. That's not the point. You pick your target, you freeze some part of that, and Olinsky is very pointed about that because he says where he got the idea from, and you're going to love this, where he got the idea from was from what Christ said in the book of Luke. When Christ said, you're either for me or you're against me. And he took that to say is if you're trying to destroy someone, you cannot take someone who, out of 100%, 80% is really, really good, and then 20% might not be so good. Well, you're not going to be able to destroy someone when you say, you know what, we don't think this person should be here even though they got a great family and he's feeding the poor, because people are going to look at that and go, well, why do we want to destroy that? No, Alinsky said it's all or nothing. And therefore, you have to make people look away from the 80% that's good, just focus on the 20% that's bad, even if you have to lie about it, because that's the only way you're going to destroy someone. You pick your target, you freeze it, you make it very personal, and then you polarize it. Kavanaugh was the perfect example of this tactic, because that's exactly what they did to Kavanaugh. Okay, and you polarize it. And oh, by the way, remember, your ends justify your means, because politics is war by other means. So if you can't take down the individual, you go after their wife, or their husband, or their children. And if you destroy a young child in the way, so what? Shouldn't have been in the way. Think about, who was the individual that ran for president? He worked for the pizza company. Herman Cain. Remember when Herman Cain ran for president? I mean, here you've got a black man that's running for president. You'd seem people would want to, vote for that individual. But yet, they kind of started going after him, but it was actually his wife that said, hey, look, I think I want you to back out, because they started attacking her. And so there's no rules for them, because, like I said, they're after they look at what Machiavelli said, where if you have to do something immoral, once you succeed, it makes your immoral act moral. Okay, rule number 12. The price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. You cannot risk being trapped by the enemy in his sudden agreement with your demand. You don't want to actually solve the problems. What you want is power and a seat at the table. Example, let's say that what you say that you want is more minority jobs at Walmart. So you organize a group, you go to the CEO of Walmart, and you got the media there, and you get in the CEO's face and you say, what we want is more minority manager jobs at Walmart. And the CEO says, how many do you want? And you say, 50. And he says, great, you can have 60 and you can have them this week. Well, what's your backup plan? Because remember, you don't really want the jobs. What you want is a seat at the table so you can have power, so you can milk Walmart for as long as you can stay there. So what he's saying there is, you don't want to let the cat out of the bag. You don't want whatever you say you're asking for. You want to make sure you got a backup plan, because if they give it to you, you're going to be looking foolish if the cameras are running. So you want to make sure that you have a backup alternative, because you don't really want to solve anything. You just want a seat at the table. Number 11, if you push a negative hard enough, it will push through and become a positive. And this is based on the principle that every positive has a negative. Okay? What he means by this is, let's say that Jackie has picked her favorite political person that she's supporting in the next election. Okay? And she's really excited about this next person. So what she does is she puts on the candidate's hat, she puts on the candidate's shirt, she takes the candidate's sign, and she goes out to her favorite street corner and she starts waving her sign. She's just happy Jackie doing what she does to get her candidate elected. I don't like that because I'm an Olinskyite. So what I do is I go to her corner and I get really close to her face and I call her every despicable name that I can think of. Right in her face. Well, three things are going to happen. First of all, she can stand there and take it. Well, if she stands there and take it, that's fine by me because, you know, I can't stand her anyway. She's a racist, she's a homophobe, she's a mean right-winger, and now I get to scream at her. Okay? The second thing that happens, I scream those things at her and she says, I don't like it, and she leaves. Great. I don't want her to be out here anyway. She goes home all in tears. Now I'm on her street corner waving my candidate sign. I win again. Or the third thing is, because I'm so close to Jackie and I'm screaming obscenities at her, she feels threatened and she hits me. I walk away. And Jackie thinks, great, I've solved that problem. Then Jackie gets home, turns on Channel 4 News, and there I am with this video that somebody in the bushes took. And I said, I was just walking down the street, minding my own business, and this horrible right-winger just hit me in the head. Here it is. You see how that you push a negative into a positive? Because now everybody that's watching the news just think, my gosh, it's true. These right-wingers are violent because this poor guy was just walking down the street and Jackie just hauled off and hit him in the head. And now Jackie is upset because now everyone thinks she's violent. And now the candidate's looking at that going, hey, I don't know who that Jackie woman is, but I don't want her campaigning for me anymore because apparently she's hitting people. And you saw that in the Trump campaign. And I used to just, I guess, chuckle to myself because if you remember, the cameras would be at the Trump campaign. And they would always say, Trump is inciting violence at his campaigns. And then it would be some radical left-winger acting like a moron at Trump's rally. And I would look at that and go, wait a minute. If Trump is inciting violence, they would be at Hillary's rally, not at his rally. They would be at Hillary's rally. Well, that's assuming that anyone showed up at Hillary's rally. But you get my point. You know, if the violence is against Hillary, then they would be at Hillary's rally, not at Trump's rally. Everybody at Trump's rally loved Trump except the radical, violent left. The major premise for tactics, and this is rule number 10, is a development of operations that will maintain constant pressure on the opposition. It is this unceasing pressure that results in the reactions from the opposition that are essential for the success of the campaign. Because what Olinsky talks about is it's not so much what you do, but it's what you do to get your enemy to react. You want your enemy to react so then you can capitalize on his actions. And that's what he's saying. The whole major premise for the tactics is to get your opponent to make a move, hopefully a bad move, so you can capitalize on it. Okay? Number 9. The threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. Imagination and ego can dream up many more consequences than any activist. Perception is reality. Large organizations always prepare a worst-case scenario, something that may be furthest from the activist's mind. The upshot is the organization will spend enormous time and energy creating in its own collective mind the direst of conclusions that result in demoralization. So what he's saying there is you want to pick up the phone, you want to call your political candidate or whatever corporation you're against, say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Now you're going to be careful there because you don't want to get too far out because the other person might say, well, then do it because we really want to watch this. Like, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to set myself on fire at your building. Okay, great. We'll show up with a fire extinguisher. We'll see how far you get. You don't want to do something like that. But what he's saying here is that you want to create this mindset in your enemy of like, these people are kind of, wacko. We don't know what they're going to do, so we need to plan for everything. And of course, if you're planning for all these contingency operations, you're not spending time or money of what you actually need to get done, which might be the good thing you're trying to do. All this is a psychological warfare. Keep the pressure on. Keep trying new things to keep the opposition off balance. As the opposition masters one approach, hit them from the flank with something new. Attack, attack, attack. Does that not sound like a military term? Right? Attack, attack, attack from all sides. Never give the reeling organization a chance to rest, regroup, recover, and then re-strategize. Try to keep them off balance. Now this last quote, I actually, in my research, I came across this and I thought it was kind of interesting. And Jerry Falwell was talking about in the political spectrum. He goes, Jerry Falwell said you can always count on Christians. If they lose, they quit. If they win, they quit. You can always count on them. Okay, rule number 7. A tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. Man can sustain militant interest in any issue for only a limited time, after which it becomes a ritualistic commitment. Don't become old news. Even radical activists get bored, so keep them excited and keep them involved. Okay, you want to make it fun. Rule number 6, a good tactic is one that your people enjoy. So if your people are not having a ball doing it, then there's something wrong with your tactic. You need to change it. Radical activists, in this sense, are no different than anyone else. We all avoid unfun activities, but we revel at and enjoy ones that work and bring results. Okay? You want people to show up every day loving the fact that they're destroying somebody good. Okay? Number 5, ridicule is a man's most potent weapon. There is no defense. It's irrational. It's infuriating. It works as a key pressure point to force the enemy into concessions. It's pretty rude and crude, and it's mean. But the objective is to create anger and fear in your opponent. It's not what you do, but what you can get the enemy to do. You want to get the enemy to make a mistake. Rule number 4, make the enemy live up to his own book of rules. So if the rule is every letter gets a reply, then send 30,000 letters. You can kill them with this because no one can possibly obey all their rules. The besieged entity's credibility and reputation are at stake because if the activists catch you lying or not living up to the commitments, then they can constantly chip away to create further damage. So you want to be careful because if you got rules out there that you can't obey, and Olinsky said that every organization has rules that they can't obey. So what the radical needs to do is make sure they take a good look at the corporations or the campaign's rules, and then, like he says, if they say, we promise to answer every letter that's mailed to our office, great. We're going to mail 30,000 letters, and then we're going to get in front of the news and say, well, we mailed you a letter, you didn't answer it, clearly you're a liar, and no one should support you. Okay, rule number 3. Whenever possible, go outside the expertise of the enemy. Look for ways to increase insecurity, anxiety, and uncertainty. This happens all the time. Watch how organizations and people under attack are blindsided by seemingly irrelevant arguments that are then forced to address, i.e. gotcha questions. Now, here's where I am constantly amused by President Trump, because I have no way of knowing that he's ever read this book. I'm going to say that he probably hasn't, but a lot of things that he does is just a gut feeling for him. It's just instinctive. So in the 2.5 years that he's been president, I think he's only done maybe 3 or 4, there's only been 3 or 4 times where he's told the press ahead of time that he's going to speak to them and allow questions. Okay? So that means that they have a chance to kind of get together and gang up on him. Right? Almost all of his dealings with the media, it's kind of on the go. It's like when he's going out to Marine One, and he'll stop and start taking questions from the media. Well, that's because it makes the media, now they've got to think on their feet, and oh, by the way, he's very comfortable in that because now he's deciding when he wants to engage with the media. And if you watch him, and the media does this all the time, like it can be some question about North Korea. So there'll be 3 or 4 questions about North Korea, and then there'll just be some asinine question that is absolutely ridiculous, and they do that on purpose because of rule number 3. You want to put that individual in circumstances that they're not comfortable with. And yet every time they do that to Trump, again, I have to laugh every time I watch him because he'll get the question and he'll look at the individual and go, that's really a stupid question. You're an idiot. Who do you work for? Oh, that group, of course, the fake news media. Has anyone ever told you you're an idiot? Why would you ask such a stupid question? And then he's berating them because it's live, because they always go live to the president. They can't cut that out. And he's berating these individuals. Well, what do you say to anyone, much less the president, when you ask a stupid question being very sacrosanct, like you're asking this so important question, and you're only doing it to embarrass the other person, and then they look at you and go, you're an idiot. Why would you ask such a question? I love the president when he does that because he totally cuts them off, and then they don't know where to go from that. Have you ever noticed they don't tend to ask another stupid question unless you're Jim Acosta, and he seems to be eating up with the stupid question thing, so he can't get away from it. Okay, number 2. But never go outside the expertise of your people. It results in confusion, fear, and retreat. Feeling secure adds to the backbone of anyone. Organizations under attack wonder why radicals don't address the real issues. And you already know the answers, because they don't want to solve those issues. What they want is to have a seat at the table so they can have power. So they avoid things of which they have no knowledge of, which is the issues that they say that they really want to solve. And the number one rule is power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Power is derived from two main sources, money and people. Have-nots must build power from flesh and blood. If you have all the money and all the people, you can rule the world. If you don't have all the money, you better have all the people. And if you don't have all the people, you better have all the money. And like I said, if you don't have either, then you just stink the place up. You just try to create mayhem so that you can stop whatever good is trying to be done. So those are the 13 rules to be a radical. Okay, so how did we get here? Because if you look at, Truman. Truman was, I think, was a very, very good president. Look at John F. Kennedy. He was a very, very good president. There's no way that Truman and Kennedy could belong to the Democratic Party of today. So how did the party get so far away from really the foundings of our country? Well, I'm going to answer that question. The communists ran a presidential candidate every year starting in 1948, but they got nowhere. Of course, we're a capitalist country. We're based in liberty. We're based in freedom. Okay? We don't want the communist utopia like North Korea and Russia and Cuba. We want what we have now. So they had to change their name to progressives. Now I'm going to make another bold statement here. Am I saying that progressives are communists? Yeah, I am. And if you don't believe me, I dare you to do this. Go to the Democratic National website, pull up their website, and write down the first 10 things that you say that they stand for. Write down the first 10 things that they say they want to impose on the country. Then go to Communist Party USA, CPUSA, when you pull it up, lots of red on that website. Pull up that website and write the 10 things down that Communist Party USA say that they want for this country. Compare the two and give me a call and tell me how many of them are different. Because if I'm telling you to do it, I've already done it myself. In fact, when I was at National, I had a friend of mine. He was he was a great guy. He used to tell me he was very smart because even though he was from California, his wife was from Jacksonville. So I said, hey, you got to be smart. You got a Jacksonville girl. But he was a hardcore progressive Democrat. And I was on the CPUS website kind of looking, and he comes into my office, and he sits down in front of me. And I said, hey, I just want to ask you a question. Do you believe such and such? And he goes, I sure do. And I go, do you believe that we should do such and such? He's like, yeah. I said, how about this? He goes, yeah. He goes, are you on the Democratic National website? And I flipped my computer screen around. I said, no, I'm on the Communist Party USA. Is this what you believe? He got up and left my office. So that kind of proved my point right there. Okay, a great guy, just kind of on the wrong side in my opinion. Okay, so the radicals were, back up one here. Okay, so they changed their name to progressives. The last Democrat, actual Democrat presidential candidate was George McGovern in 1972. I already pointed out that in 1968, you got 30,000 police and military at the 68 Democratic Convention in Chicago. You got 10,000 radicals, and they had this big confrontation. Middle class looked at that and said, we don't want anything to do with it, so the Republicans win. 1972, kind of the same thing. The radicals are still out there screaming and yelling, and they're getting nowhere, and that really frustrates them. So the last actual Democrat presidential candidate would have been George McGovern in 1972. So the radicals are frustrated, and they go to Olinsky for help. And this is what he tells them. He told the radicals, quit standing outside of the Democratic National Convention and yelling at the delegates. He told them, cut your hair, take a bath, put on deodorant, put on a suit, and become the DNC delegates. Now you know why the Democratic Party has moved so far left. Because now instead of screaming and yelling outside, they've moved inside to co-opt the Democratic Party because, according to Saul Alinsky, that's where the real power is anyway. You know this guy? This is Van Jones. He's a very handsome guy, I think. He's a snappy dresser. If you ever see him on television, the guy has really nice suits. He looks like a nice guy. He's already been in prison, got a prison record, okay? But he doesn't even hide it. When he's on CNN, he'll tell you, I'm Van Jones. I'm a communist. This is who I am. I don't hide it anymore. I am the face of communism. Handsome black man, I dress snappy, because that's what Olinsky said you do. You pick your issue, you look nice, and then whatever the issue is, you cloak it in moral garments. Okay. So Olinsky agreed with the goals of the radicals, and that was to destroy the middle class values. All rebels must attack the power states in their society, the middle class. Now he's talking about the middle class here. So I already said that I think everybody in here is the middle class. Okay? I'm pretty sure everybody in here has a net worth of less than $1 billion. But he looked at the middle class. He said they have lots of power because they're good. But he also said the middle class is materialistic, decadent, bourgeois, degenerate, imperialistic, warmongering, brutalized, and corrupt. Does that describe you? Because that's what Olinsky said you were, we are, and that's why we need to be moved to the radical side. He also said that as part of the middle class, they are also part of our racist, discriminatory culture. How many times do you hear the left say, you don't have to talk to them within 3 sentences, and if you start winning the argument, you're winning because you're a racist. You hear that constantly. You're a racist. Okay? You do what you can with what you have, and you clothe it in moral garments. You're seeing that more and more, in my opinion, if you go on YouTube and just start pulling up what's being said on college campuses. You see more and more that the students are really being propagandized to believe that what they're being taught has a moral framework. The one that really stands out to me is if you watch the Democratic National Convention, nothing gets Democrats more excited than killing the unborn. And I've never been able to understand that. And I've even asked people that I know as Democrats. The one thing I don't understand, I mean, I can understand if you think that people should have an opportunity to get an abortion if they want to. I can kind of see your point on that. But what I don't get is when abortion comes up at the National Convention, there's just this joy that erupts throughout everyone that I don't understand. I don't understand the happiness with killing the most innocent among us. I just don't get that at all. And that really seems to be the litmus test for the Democratic Party. But if you talk to them, they'll tell you, what do you mean? It's very moral. It's a woman's right. I read the Declaration of Independence. I saw in there it's about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't pursue happiness without liberty, and you can't have liberty without life. Life is fundamental. And they seem to be very happy of destroying life, some 55 million unborn children to this point. My point now that is that they take something that, in my opinion, is murder, but they clothe it in moral argument so that if you try to debate with them, you're already the immoral person in the conversation because you don't believe in that supposed right for a woman to kill her unborn child. He said it's a world not of it's a world not of angels, but of angles, where men speak of moral principles, but they act on power principles. Because what is Saul Alinsky's book all about? Power. It's all about how to get power and use it. Now, I said that Olinsky was against, violent revolutions. He said that, well, let's do it at the ballot box instead. But he also liked Lenin's writings, and he said, this is Lenin speaking here. He said, they have the guns, and therefore we are at peace and for reformation through the ballot. Okay? But when we have the guns, then it'll be through the bullet. So he wasn't opposed to, if you ever wonder why the left is so intent of disarming the American public, because once they have all the guns, they don't have to do anything at the ballot box then. They can just show up with a gun and tell you what to do. What are you going to do? Shoot a broom at them? I mean, not going to have anything. They'll have all the guns. So even though while he built his reputation as a champion for the poor and the underdog, he didn't like capitalism, but he certainly liked what capitalism provided. He enjoyed the good life because apparently he made quite a lot of money as being a community organizer. He enjoyed the good life. He liked good food, good wine, good cigars, and golf. One of his favorite places was Carmel, California. You may remember Clint Eastwood was the mayor of Carmel. It's on the West Coast near Monterey. And he died there in 1972 of a heart attack, a year after he published Rules for Radicals. It was also during the same time that Playboy magazine gave him an interview. And they asked him a question about whether or not that they thought he would go to heaven or hell. And he said, well, you know, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in heaven or hell. He said, but if I had to choose, I'd go to hell, because once I got there, I'd organize it and take it over and make it mine anyway. So that was his feelings about the afterlife. So I've taught you about the 13 rules for radicals. I've given you everything I can about the book, but I've told you that these are just my thoughts, and I don't, I don't want you to think that I'm speaking for any other entity. But I do want to speak for my true entity, and this is what I really like. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.